You know that sinking feeling in your stomach when something happens to your child? Something so unfair and humiliating that you almost don't know whether to cry or scream, or just grab your kid, hold them close, and shield them from the world? That's exactly what I felt the moment I realized my daughter, my sweet, funny, tender-hearted little girl, was the only child in our entire extended family who had not been invited to a party that my own mother, her grandmother, had organized. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Surely no one would deliberately exclude her. She's only 7, still at that stage where she draws little hearts on sticky notes and leaves them on my nightstand, still at that stage where she waves goodbye to me through the school bus window until I disappear from sight, still at that stage where the thought of being left out by her cousins, all of whom she adores and talks about constantly, would crush her in a way she might not even have the words for yet. And yet, there was the photos trickling onto social media, the group text buzzing in the family chat, the chatter of excitement about games, decorations, food, music, and the laughter of all the other kids in the family, except mine. The realization didn't hit me all at once. It sort of crept in, like standing in a room where the temperature drops degree by degree until suddenly you're shivering and you don't know when it started. At first, I noticed a cousin's post about the decorations and thought, oh, I must have missed the invite. Then I noticed another cousin posting about the cake, and then another posting about how their kids were so excited to go. And then it dawned on me. No email in my inbox, no message on my phone, no text about directions or dress code. Nothing. My stomach dropped, and I quickly went back through my messages just to be sure, scrolling, searching, trying keywords, checking if maybe I had somehow overlooked it. But there was nothing, absolutely nothing. And that's when the dread set in, because the only explanation left was the one I didn't want to believe, that it wasn't a mistake. That my mom, my own mother, had organized a family gathering for every grandchild she had except for my daughter. And as soon as that thought took root, a million questions started rushing into my mind like a tidal wave I couldn't stop. Why? Why her? What had my daughter done? What had I done? Had we said something? Had I missed a call? Did my mom not like something about her? About us? The questions made me dizzy, but underneath them all was this fierce, boiling anger, because it wasn't just about me being excluded. It was my daughter. She had been cut out of something that should have been a source of joy, connection, and love. And instead she had been made the outsider in her own family. And the more I thought about it, the more it hurt, because I could already imagine the questions she would ask me if she found out. I could picture her big brown eyes looking up at me, wide and confused, and her little voice asking, "Why didn't Grandma want me there?" And how could I answer that? How do you explain to a child that sometimes the very people who are supposed to love them unconditionally can act in ways that make them feel unwanted? The thought of having to explain that broke my heart in advance, and I could already feel tears welling up behind my eyes as I sat there in the quiet of my living room, phone buzzing with family messages that now felt like daggers instead of updates. My hands shook as I scrolled through photos that showed smiling faces of kids running around, balloons in the background, cousins with their arms around each other, a big banner that read, "Family Fun Day." A banner that mocked me because it clearly wasn't for all family. The more I looked, the more I realized it wasn't some small get-together. It was huge. It was planned for weeks, maybe months. The decorations, the catering, the music, all of it showed effort and forethought. My mother had gone to great lengths to make this special for everyone, except my child. And that stung in a way I can't even fully describe. Because if it had been a casual BBQ, something spontaneous where maybe we just hadn't been called, I could chalk it up to oversight. But this was deliberate. This was exclusion with intention, and that intention was like a knife to the chest. I kept replaying moments in my head, trying to figure out when things shifted. Had there been an argument I hadn't realized? Had my daughter misbehaved in a way my mom couldn't tolerate? But even if she had, she's 7. She's a child. Children make mistakes. Children have moods. Children spill drinks or cry or fight with cousins sometimes. But you don't banish a child from family for being a child. And deep down, I knew this wasn't about my daughter at all. It was about me. It had to be. And that realization carried its own weight, because suddenly it wasn't just about my daughter being excluded. It was about generations of complicated family dynamics, resentments, grudges, and unspoken tensions bubbling up in the ugliest way possible, spilling over onto the one person who should have been kept out of it, my little girl. As I sat there, heart pounding, stomach twisting, I realized that no matter how I tried to rationalize it, no matter how many excuses I tried to make in my head, there was no denying it. My daughter had been left out, and she would notice. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but she would notice. And when she did, I'd be the one to pick up the pieces, to hold her when she cried, to reassure her that she was loved even though her own grandmother had failed to show it. And that's when the fire inside me started to grow. Because if there's one thing you don't do, it's hurt my child. And my mother, whether she realized it or not, had just crossed a line that might never be uncrossed. A tooth the night after discovering the truth about the party, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the streetlight outside stretching across the walls like silent reminders of the ache inside my chest. My mind kept looping through the same questions, circling endlessly like a song on repeat that you wish you could turn off but can't. Why would my own mother choose to do this? How could she look at her granddaughter? This innocent little girl who only ever smiles at her and hugs her tightly when we visit, and decide she didn't belong at a gathering that was meant to celebrate family. Every time I thought about it, I felt the burn of tears in my eyes, but anger always rose up quickly to dry them. I thought back to the days when I was younger, when my mom's approval was something I desperately chased, when I was the child trying to earn her affection with perfect grades or little gifts made from construction paper. When I believed that if I just tried hard enough, she would finally look at me the way she looked at my siblings. And maybe that was the root of it. Maybe this exclusion wasn't just about my daughter, but about me, an echo of the favoritism I had seen all my life. Only now it had spilled over onto the next generation. Memories began to flood back, ones I hadn't thought about in years. The birthdays where my cake was smaller, the holidays where my gifts were fewer, the casual comments about how my siblings were more responsible, or more successful, while I was still figuring things out. I had learned to swallow that pain as an adult, to tell myself I didn't need her validation anymore, that I had built my own family, my own life, and that was enough. But seeing my daughter treated the way I had been treated, seeing her pushed aside as though she were invisible, reopened wounds I thought I had scarred over long ago. It was like watching a cruel cycle repeat itself, except this time it wasn't just me enduring it. It was the one person I would do anything to protect. I turned onto my side and looked at my daughter sleeping peacefully beside me. She had crawled into my bed earlier that night, after having a bad dream, her small hand still resting on my arm as though holding on to me even in her sleep. Her chest rose and fell softly, her face illuminated by the faint light, and I thought about how she had no idea what was happening behind her back, no clue that the people she looked up to were laughing and celebrating without her. I thought about how, in the morning, she would probably ask why I seemed so tired, and I would have to plaster on a smile and say I was fine, because the truth would only break her heart. That was the cruelest part. Keeping the truth from her felt like lying, but telling her the truth felt like breaking her. I didn't know which was worse. My phone buzzed again on the nightstand. Another family photo coming through, this one of all the cousins lined up in a row, holding party favors, faces glowing with joy. I forced myself to look away, but not before noticing the glaring gap where my daughter should have been. It was like a puzzle missing its final piece, an image that would never be whole. I thought about deleting the family group chat entirely, about cutting ties once and for all, about finally freeing myself from this endless cycle of being the outsider in my own family. But then the guilt crept in, because no matter how much pain my mother caused me, a part of me still craved her love, still wanted her acceptance, still hoped that maybe one day she would see me and my daughter as worthy of being included. That's the twisted thing about family. You can be hurt over and over again, but the hope lingers, stubborn and unyielding. And in that hope lies the deepest pain, because every new betrayal cuts sharper than the last. I shifted again, pulling the blanket tighter around us, listening to the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the occasional car passing by outside. Everything in the world seemed to be moving on, ordinary and steady, while inside me there was this storm that wouldn't settle. I wanted to call my mom right then and demand an explanation, to shout at her, to ask her how she could sleep at night knowing she had excluded her granddaughter. But another part of me hesitated, afraid of the answer I might get, afraid it would confirm everything I already suspected, that my daughter and I would never be truly accepted in this family. So instead I lay there, torn between rage and despair, feeling like a child all over again, powerless in the face of my mother's decisions. I thought about my siblings too, about how none of them had said a word. They all went along with it, attended the party, took the pictures, posted the captions, without once asking, "Where's her daughter? Why isn't she here?" That silence stung almost as much as the exclusion itself, because it meant they were complicit. They had chosen to look the other way, to pretend it was fine, and that made me wonder if they too believed my daughter didn't belong. The betrayal layered itself like bricks in my chest, heavy and suffocating, and I closed my eyes tightly as if darkness could block out the images seared into my mind. But even in the darkness, I saw them. The balloons, the banner, the cousins playing together, always with the glaring absence of the one child who mattered most to me. And in that darkness, I made myself a silent promise. I would not let this define her. I would not let my mother's cruelty shape how my daughter saw herself. If my family chose to exclude her, then I would make sure she was surrounded by people who cherished her, who celebrated her, who made her feel like the precious soul she truly is. Because she deserved that. She deserved the world. And even if it meant walking away from the family I was born into, I would do it. Because my loyalty now was to the little girl sleeping peacefully beside me, unaware of the storm her grandmother had unleashed. A threave the next morning, sunlight crept through the blinds, casting pale golden stripes across the floor. And I woke up groggy from the restless night. My daughter was still curled up beside me, her hair a messy halo around her head, her tiny breath steady and calm. And for a moment, I just stared at her and thought about how blissful it was that she still didn't know what had happened, that she had been spared the sting of rejection for now. But the peace of that moment didn't last long, because my phone buzzed on the nightstand again. Another set of photos, another reminder that the family was still together somewhere celebrating while we had been left behind. This time I didn't even look at the pictures. I couldn't. I just flipped the phone over, face down as though the weight of the silence could bury it. Still, my daughter stirred, opened her sleepy eyes, and asked in the sweetest voice, "Mommy, why are you sad?" And that question, innocent and piercing, hit me harder than any photo could. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forced my lips into a smile, and said, "I'm just tired, baby." But she tilted her head, studying me the way children do when they sense something is off, and I could see that she didn't fully believe me. I knew this day would come. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. When she'd realize she hadn't been included, when she'd hear her cousins talking about the party or see a picture pop up somewhere, and then I'd have to find the words to explain. But for now, I tried to preserve her innocence, because once she knew, she could never unknow, and I wanted her to hold on to her sense of belonging for just a little longer. I made us breakfast, trying to act normal, pouring her cereal, slicing some fruit, even humming along to the radio, as though the pit in my stomach wasn't growing heavier with each passing minute. She chattered happily about school, about how she wanted to wear her favorite sparkly shoes on Monday, about how her friend had promised to share stickers with her, and I smiled and nodded, grateful for the way her world was still filled with such simple joys. But even as I listened, I couldn't shake the knowing thought that soon, her joy would be dimmed by the reality of being left out by her own family. It's one thing for a child to be excluded at school. Kids can be cruel, cliques form, and teachers do their best but can't always control it. But being excluded by family, by people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, that's a wound that cuts deeper, one that doesn't heal as easily, and I hated that my daughter was about to be scared by that. Later that day, I couldn't resist checking social media again, as though staring at the wound would somehow desensitize me to the pain. There they were, dozens of photos and videos of the party in full swing. The kids had been playing games, tossing water balloons, chasing each other around the yard while adults clapped and laughed. There was a piñata, there were bounce houses, there were tables loaded with food, and a giant cake decorated with bright colors. Everyone looked radiant, carefree, joyful. Everyone except us. It was like watching a movie from the outside, a film you're not cast in, but everyone else is. And then came the photo that gutted me, all the grandchildren standing together, lined up beneath a banner that said, "Grandma's Angels." Every grandchild except mine. The caption my sister had posted read, "Mom with her beautiful grandkids. So blessed!" And my mom was in the center, beaming, surrounded by smiling little faces, arms wrapped around her knees and shoulders. Her pride and joy on full display, minus one child who was just as much her grandchild as the others, but had been erased from the picture like she didn't exist. My hand trembled so hard I almost dropped the phone, and I felt something inside me snap. Anger surged so strongly it made my vision blur, and I wanted to scream, to smash the phone against the wall, to call my mother and demand how she could dare post a photo celebrating her grandkids, while deliberately excluding mine. I wanted to ask her if she even realized what she had done, if she even cared that she was cutting out a piece of her family and pretending she was whole without it. But instead, I just sat there, staring at the screen, tears streaming down my face in hot, uncontrollable waves, while my daughter played with her toys on the rug, blissfully unaware. It was the cruelest contrast, her laughter filling the room, while I was silently breaking apart inside. I thought about calling one of my siblings, asking them why they went along with this, why they didn't speak up, why they didn't insist my daughter be included. But then I thought about their smiles in the photos, their cheerful captions, and I knew they wouldn't have answers I wanted to hear. They had chosen comfort over confrontation, and in doing so, they had chosen complicity. And that realization made me feel even more alone. Because when your whole family turns their back on you, where do you go? Who do you lean on? The idea of cutting ties became clearer in my mind, but with it came grief. Because walking away meant not only losing my mother, but losing the siblings I grew up with, the nieces and nephews my daughter adored, the cousins she wanted to be close to. It felt like tearing out a piece of her childhood, but what choice did I have? Keeping her in that environment would only teach her that love is conditional, that she must fight for acceptance from people who should give it freely. And I refused to let her grow up believing that. So I wiped my tears, turned off my phone, and sat down on the rug next to her, determined to focus on her laughter, her joy, her presence in that moment. Because if my family couldn't see how extraordinary she was, that was their loss. But deep down, even as I smiled and played with her, I knew the reckoning was coming. Sooner or later, the truth would come out. She would find out she had been the only one not invited. And when that moment came, I would need to be strong enough to hold her pain as well as my own. And in that thought, I found a strange sense of clarity, a kind of grim resolve, that no matter how much it hurt, I would stand by her, I would lift her, I would remind her again and again that she was enough, that she was more than enough, and that sometimes family is not the people you're born into, but the people who choose you. The day after the party felt heavier than the one before, not because anything new had happened, but because the silence was deafening. Nobody called, nobody texted, nobody asked where we were or why we hadn't shown up, and that absence of acknowledgement was almost worse than the exclusion itself. It was like my mother and siblings had collectively decided to erase us, to pretend my daughter and I simply didn't exist, as if ignoring us would make their betrayal less cruel. I kept replaying the image of that group photo in my head, the one with all the grandchildren lined up beneath that ridiculous Grandma's Angels banner, and every time it surfaced, it felt like my heart was being sliced open again. I couldn't escape it, not when I scrolled through social media and saw strangers, acquaintances, even distant relatives commenting things like, "What a beautiful family," or, "You're such a lucky grandma." My mother was basking in the glow of their admiration, posting pictures with carefully crafted captions about love and togetherness, while the truth, the ugly, painful truth, was that she had deliberately left one child out. My child. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't something I could just swallow and move on from. Because to swallow it meant teaching my daughter to accept mistreatment, to accept being invisible, to accept scraps of love where she deserved the whole feast. I couldn't let that happen. Still, the thought of confrontation twisted my stomach into knots. Confronting my mother had never ended well in the past. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, she had twisted my words, made me feel guilty, accused me of being dramatic or ungrateful. I could already hear her voice in my head, sharp and dismissive. "Oh, stop being so sensitive. It wasn't even a big deal." Or worse, she'd play the victim, turning the narrative so that I was somehow the one causing pain, the one destroying the family, the one overreacting to what she would frame as a harmless oversight. But this wasn't harmless, and I refused to let her gaslight me into thinking it was. The stakes were higher now, because it wasn't just my feelings on the line. It was my daughter's sense of worth, her belief that she belonged in this family. And I could already sense that the confrontation, when it happened, wouldn't just be about the party. It would be about years of resentment I had buried, years of favoritism and subtle cruelty, years of bending myself into knots trying to win her approval, and always falling short. The thought of unleashing all of that terrified me, but it also gave me strength, because if she wasn't going to protect my daughter, then I damn well would. The tension sat in my chest all day, buzzing like a live wire I couldn't touch, and by the afternoon I found myself pacing the kitchen, phone in hand, debating whether to dial her number. My daughter was in the living room drawing, humming softly to herself, her crayons scattered across the coffee table, and I stared at her small figure and thought, she deserves better than this silence. I thought about what would happen if I didn't say anything, about the next party, the next holiday, The next gathering where she might be excluded again, and how each exclusion would carve deeper wounds into her little heart. The idea was unbearable. So I opened my contacts, found my mom's name, and just stared at it, my thumb hovering over the call button, my pulse hammering in my ears. I imagined what I would say, how I would demand answers, how I would try to keep my voice steady, when every part of me wanted to scream. But before I could press it, doubt clawed at me. What if she denied it? What if she blamed me? What if she said something so cruel it couldn't be taken back, something that would forever sever the fragile thread that still tied us together? For a moment, fear won, and I set the phone down, pressing my palms to my eyes, trying to steady my breathing. My daughter looked up from her drawing and asked, "Mommy, can you help me with the rainbow?" And I forced myself to smile and sit beside her, grateful for the temporary distraction, for the way her innocent world gave me a reprieve from the storm raging in mine. But even as I helped her choose colors, I knew I couldn't put this off forever. Later that night, after I tucked her into bed, I sat alone in the dark with a glass of water, the silence pressing in around me, and I finally decided I couldn't run from this any longer. I picked up my phone, opened the messages, and typed, "Why wasn't my daughter invited to the party?" My hands shook as I stared at the words, a simple question that carried the weight of all the years of hurt behind it. I hesitated for a long time, hovering over the send button, because once I sent it, there would be no turning back. But then I pictured my daughter's face, the way her eyes would search mine if she ever asked why Grandma hadn't wanted her there, and that gave me the courage I needed. I hit send. The message left my phone with a soft whoosh, and immediately my chest tightened as though I had just stepped off a cliff. Seconds felt like hours, and I sat there staring at the screen, waiting for the typing bubbles to appear. They didn't. Minutes dragged on, my anxiety rising with each one, until finally my phone buzzed with her reply. 3 words. 3 cold, cutting words that changed everything. It wasn't personal, that was it. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. Just a dismissive shrug of a message that was somehow worse than silence, because it showed me exactly where I stood in her world. And for the first time in my life, I realized that maybe I didn't want to stand there anymore. So 5, when I read those 3 words, it wasn't personal. I felt something inside me fracture in a way I couldn't glue back together. Not this time, not ever. Because how could excluding a child from a family gathering, a child who looks up to you, who loves you unconditionally, who sees you as their grandmother, not be personal? How could deliberately leaving out the only granddaughter who never misses a chance to hug you and say, "I love you, Grandma," be brushed off like it was the same as forgetting to send an extra spoon to a dinner table? It was so cold, so detached, so dismissive that it actually made me laugh at first, a bitter, humorless laugh that bubbled out of me before it turned into tears. My hands were trembling as I stared at my phone, rereading the message over and over, hoping maybe I was misinterpreting it, hoping maybe there was more coming, an explanation, an apology, anything, but nothing followed, just silence. I sat there for what felt like forever, the glow of the screen illuminating my face in the dark, and I felt the storm build inside me. A storm made of every memory of being overlooked, every time I'd been pushed aside, every time my achievements or my needs had been minimized by the same woman, who was now minimizing my daughter, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. I typed back, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a fury I couldn't stop. Not personal? It was very personal. You excluded the only granddaughter who has never done anything but love you. She was the only one not invited. Do you even realize how cruel that is? Do you understand what that does to a child? I hit send before I could overthink it, before I could let fear stop me again. My chest was pounding, my pulse racing, and this time, the typing bubbles appeared almost instantly. For a second, I felt a surge of hope. Maybe she would finally see. Maybe she would realize the hurt she had caused. Maybe she would at least try to fix it. But then the reply came, and it shattered me all over again. "You're being dramatic. It wasn't about her. It was about you." And there it was. The truth hidden beneath the surface, pulled out into the open like a poison that had been seeping through the cracks for years. It wasn't about my daughter, not really. It was about me. My mother had chosen to punish me, and the easiest way to do that was to strike where it would hurt the most, through my child. I stared at the message, my vision blurring with tears, and my mind flooded with memories of all the ways she had done this to me before, though never so cruelly, never so blatantly. The subtle digs at family dinners, the way she always praised my siblings while leaving me with backhanded compliments, the times she made me feel like an outsider in my own home growing up. It had always been about control, about reminding me that I would never measure up, that I would always be on the outside looking in. And now she had extended that cruelty to my daughter. My fingers flew across the screen again, this time without hesitation, without fear. She's a child. She's innocent. If you have an issue with me, fine, but you do not punish her for it. Do you understand the kind of damage you're doing? Do you realize you're teaching her she's not worthy of love in her own family? Do you want to be the reason she grows up questioning her worth? I was shaking so hard I had to put the phone down, afraid I might throw it against the wall if I didn't. Minutes passed with no reply, and the silence was louder than any words could be. My heart was pounding so loudly it felt like it filled the entire room, and I suddenly realized my daughter could probably hear me pacing if she woke up, so I forced myself to sit down. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to steady my breathing, and for the first time, I wondered if maybe this was the breaking point, the moment I would have to accept that my mother wasn't capable of being the kind of grandmother I wanted her to be. That thought cut deeply, because despite everything, a part of me had always hoped that she might change, that she might soften with age, that she might find it in herself to love me, and by extension my daughter, the way she loved the others. But that hope was fading, dissolving with every second of silence that followed our exchange. Finally, my phone buzzed, and I almost didn't want to look, but I did. Her response was longer this time, but it wasn't what I needed. It was worse. You've always made yourself the victim. Maybe if you were more involved, more grateful, things would be different. Don't put this on me. The party was for people who bring joy, not drama. I felt the air leave my lungs in one sharp, painful rush. People who bring joy, not drama. My daughter, my sweet, bright, innocent little girl, had been labeled as drama by the very person who was supposed to love her without conditions. It wasn't just rejection anymore. It was contempt. My vision blurred with tears as I clutched the phone, my whole body trembling, and I wanted to scream, to howl, to shake her through the screen, and make her understand what she had done. But instead, I sat there, silent, because I realized in that moment that nothing I said would ever change her. She had made her choice. She had chosen her pride, her control, her image over the bond with her granddaughter, and no amount of reasoning or pleading would undo that. And so I had to make my choice too. I had to choose between continuing to chase after a relationship that had always left me bruised, or finally breaking the cycle for good and protecting my daughter from ever feeling the sting of this kind of rejection again. I looked at the door to my daughter's room, the faint glow of her nightlight seeping out from under the crack, and I knew what my answer had to be. I would protect her. Even if it meant cutting ties, even if it meant enduring the grief of losing the family I had spent my whole life trying to hold on to, I would do it. Because my daughter deserved better. She deserved to grow up knowing she was loved, not just by me, but by the people I chose to surround her with. And if my own mother couldn't be one of those people, then so be it. For the first time in my life, I felt a strange kind of peace beneath the heartbreak, a clarity I hadn't had before. I picked up my phone one last time and typed, "We're done. Don't contact me or her again until you can treat her with the love she deserves. I won't let you hurt her the way you've hurt me." I hit send, and with that, I put the phone face down on the table, wiped my tears, and sat in the quiet, waiting for the grief to wash over me. It did, wave after wave, but underneath it was something stronger, steadier, resolve. To 6. In the days that followed, I tried to carry on as though nothing had happened, as though life in our little home could exist in its own bubble, separate from the wound that had split our family apart. But children are observant in ways we underestimate, and my daughter, sweet, intuitive soul that she is, began to notice the tension I couldn't quite mask. It started with little questions, innocent enough on the surface, but heavy with what lingered underneath. She would tug at my sleeve while I was cooking dinner and ask, "Mommy, when are we going to see Grandma again?" Or she'd chatter about her cousins, and then pause mid-sentence, a small wrinkle forming in her brow before asking, "Why don't we play with them anymore?" And each time, I felt the sting of guilt shoot through me, because I knew I couldn't protect her from the truth forever. The lie of omission weighed on me every day. It sat in my chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. At night I would lie awake again, listening to her soft breathing from the next room, and I would rehearse the words in my head. "Grandma made a choice, sweetheart. It wasn't about you. You are perfect and loved, and nothing you did made this happen." But every time I tried to picture saying it, my throat closed up, because how do you tell a child that someone who should love them unconditionally has chosen not to? How do you preserve her innocence when reality is so much harsher? I wanted to freeze her world just as it was, filled with school projects, stuffed animals, bedtime stories, and giggles. Because once she knew, something inside her would shift, and childhood is too short to be burdened with questions of worth and belonging. But fate has a cruel way of forcing truths out into the open. One afternoon, I was folding laundry while she was sitting at the table with the tablet, watching silly videos. I thought nothing of it until suddenly her voice rang out, puzzled and soft. "Mummy, why are my cousins all at Grandma's house?" My blood ran cold. I turned and saw her little face scrunched in confusion, eyes wide as she tilted the tablet toward me. There it was, another photo my sister had posted, my mother surrounded by children, balloons still taped to the walls from the party, smiles plastered on every face but hers, because hers was absent. My daughter stared at it, her small finger tracing the screen, and then she asked the question I had been dreading. Why wasn't I there? The words hit me like a blow to the chest, knocking the air out of me. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out at first. I felt my eyes sting with tears I didn't want her to see, and I forced myself to sit beside her, wrapping my arms around her tiny frame. She leaned against me, waiting, trusting, needing an answer, and I knew I couldn't dodge it anymore. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice, and whispered, "Sweetheart, sometimes people make choices that don't make sense. Sometimes they forget how special someone is, even though that someone is the most special person in the whole world." She tilted her head up at me, her eyes searching mine, and asked, "Did Grandma forget me?" The innocence in that question broke me. I swallowed hard, blinking back tears, and said, "Grandma made a mistake. But that mistake isn't about you. You didn't do anything wrong. You are wonderful, kind, funny, and so loved. Grandma's choice says more about her than it does about you." She frowned, confusion clouding her expression, and then she said in a whisper, "But I wanted to be there?" And in that moment, I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "I know, baby, I know, and it's okay to feel sad about it. But I promise you, you will never miss out on love. You will always have me, and I will always make sure you have people around you who see just how amazing you are." She hugged me tightly then, her little arms squeezing my neck with surprising strength, and I realized she was comforting me as much as I was comforting her. That's the thing about children. They feel deeply, but they also forgive so easily, and in her hug, I felt both her sadness and her resilience. But later, when she went to bed, I sat in the quiet of the living room and sobbed into my hands, because I knew the wound had been made. Even though I had tried to cushion the truth, even though I had tried to frame it in the gentlest way possible, she now knew that her grandmother had chosen to leave her out. And no matter how strong she was, no matter how much love I poured into her, that kind of rejection leaves a scar. I thought about the years ahead, about school dances, graduations, milestones where my mother might still be present for the other grandchildren, but absent for her, and I felt a fury rise inside me all over again. I wanted to shield her from every future hurt, but I also knew I couldn't. What I could do, though, was make sure she never doubted her worth because of someone else's choices. That became my mission. Over the next few days, I poured my energy into her world. We baked cookies together. We went to the park and laughed until our stomachs hurt. We built blanket forts in the living room and stayed up past bedtime telling stories. I wanted her to feel so surrounded by joy that the shadows of rejection couldn't creep too far into her mind. But every now and then she'd slip in another question, soft and tentative, like, "Do you think Grandma will invite me next time?" And every time, my heart cracked anew, because I didn't want to give her false hope. But I also didn't want to snuff out the little spark of belief she still carried that her grandmother could change. So I would say gently, "I don't know, baby. But what I do know is that we'll always find ways to celebrate together." And she would smile, trusting me, believing in me. And I silently vowed to never break that trust. Because even though I couldn't undo the cruelty of what had been done to her, I could make sure she never doubted the one truth I could give her without hesitation, that she was, and always would be, enough. So 7. In the weeks that followed, life began to settle into a strange new rhythm, one marked by both loss and liberation, grief and growth, as though two conflicting forces lived side by side inside me and refused to let go of one another. On the surface, everything looked normal: mornings filled with school drop-offs, evenings filled with homework, bedtime stories, and kisses on my daughter's forehead. But beneath that normalcy was a quiet mourning for the family I thought I had, for the childhood memories I had once held onto as proof that maybe, just maybe, there was love at the center of it all. That illusion had shattered, and in its place was a raw awareness. We had been left out deliberately, and there was no undoing it. Yet, alongside that grief was something else, something that surprised me. An undercurrent of strength I hadn't known I had, a resolve that grew clearer every day as I watched my daughter flourish in the small, simple joys we created together. She carried the hurt of her grandmother's rejection, yes, but she also carried an extraordinary resilience, the kind that children often have when they know they are deeply loved at home. I would catch her twirling in the living room, singing to herself, or proudly showing me a picture she'd drawn, and I realized that as long as I kept pouring love into her, she would bloom, no matter who tried to dim her light. And so I leaned into the act of redefining what family meant. I reached out to friends who had always been more like siblings to me than my actual siblings ever were, and I watched as they embraced my daughter with open arms, treating her like the cherished child she was. We spent weekends with neighbors who had become like extended relatives, celebrating small milestones with the kind of warmth and joy that made me realize blood isn't the only bond that matters. Slowly, I began to see that family isn't always the people who share your DNA. It's the people who show up, who stay, who love without conditions or caveats. That shift didn't erase the pain of losing the family I was born into, but it softened it, wrapped it in a layer of gratitude for the chosen family that stepped forward when we needed them most. My daughter, perceptive as ever, began to sense the change too. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and orange, she leaned her head against my shoulder and said, "Mommy, I like our family." I smiled, tears pricking my eyes, and asked softly, "What do you mean, baby?" She thought for a moment, her little legs swinging back and forth, before saying, "I like that it's us, and that we have people who love us, even if it's not Grandma." Her words, simple and true, pierced me in the best and worst way. I hugged her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, and whispered, "I like our family too." And in that moment, I realized that while she might carry the scar of rejection, she was also learning a powerful lesson. That love is not something you beg for. It's something you're given freely by those who truly see you. That realization became my anchor. On the hardest days, when grief threatened to pull me under, I reminded myself that I was giving her a gift I never had the certainty that she was enough, exactly as she was, and that she didn't have to earn anyone's love by being quieter, smarter, prettier, or more obedient. She didn't have to perform for acceptance the way I had spent my whole life performing for my mother's. She could just be, and she would be loved for it. As weeks turned into months, I noticed the weight in my chest start to lift, little by little. The family group chat had long gone silent for me. I had muted it, unwilling to subject myself to the constant reminder of the world we had been cut out from. But instead of feeling that familiar sting, I began to feel relief. Each notification I didn't see was one less dagger in my heart, one less chance to compare, one less opportunity for my mother to wield her control. The silence became its own kind of healing, a space in which I could breathe, rebuild, and choose differently. And though sometimes, late at night, I would find myself wondering what holidays would look like in the years to come, whether my daughter would miss the cousins she once adored, I held on to the promise I had made to myself that her life would be full of love. Even if I had to build it brick by brick on my own, because in truth, I wasn't alone, I had her. She had me. And together we had a foundation stronger than any bloodline, stronger than any betrayal. One day, as we were driving home from school, she looked out the window and said thoughtfully, "Do you think Grandma will ever want me again?" The question hit me like a knife, but this time, I didn't flinch. I reached over, squeezed her small hand in mine, and said, "I don't know, baby. But what I do know is that whether she does or doesn't, you will always be wanted by me." "Always?" She smiled then, a quiet smile that told me she believed me, and in that belief, I saw her strength growing alongside mine. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat by her bed for a long time, watching her chest rise and fall, and I realized that this fierce, unyielding love I felt for her was enough to carry us through. It didn't erase the hurt, but it outshined it. It didn't undo the exclusion, but it redefined what belonging meant. And as I turned off the light and whispered goodnight, I made one final vow, one that anchored itself deep in my bones, that no matter who tried to diminish her, no matter who tried to make her feel small, I would spend my life reminding her that she was bigger than their rejection, brighter than their cruelty, and stronger than their absence. And maybe, just maybe, one day she would look back and see not the pain of what she lost, but the beauty of what we built in its place.